Hi, today we're going to talk about SQ3R. Your textbook chapter really begins to discuss strategies and steps and processes for reading and writing. The SQ3R is an easy, straightforward process that you can use no matter what reading you're assigned. Okay, so if this is your first semester or your second or third semester, you'll frequently be assigned multiple chapters and multiple classes or, multiple research that you have to do. And these texts that you're assigned can often be quite challenging and pretty complicated. This process, SQ3R, makes reading purposeful for you. It makes it meaningful for you so that you use your time effectively and efficiently. So SQ3R is a five-step process. Okay. So when you're working through a reading, if you use SQ3R, it allows you to understand and process information at the same time. So it's not the first reading where you're trying to figure out what it means and then have to go back and then process that and put it into your long term. It joins those two together. So SQ3R stands for Survey, Question, Read, Recite, and Review. And our textbook does these, they just call them something different. It's just easier and more widely known for SQ3R. Using a process of SQ3R is beneficial to you for a lot of reasons. It activates your knowledge, what you already know about a topic before you even begin reading. It allows you to review the information as you are learning it. You can create study guides and notes that are effective. It eliminates the need to go back in and reread large sections of text. It also gives you an insight to the type of test questions that you are probably going to have on your assessments. Now, it's not a quicker way to read, but it's likely to reduce the amount of time you will need to spend studying that material. So you're front loading your time more effectively. So the result comes from more time being spent understanding the chapter as it's read, rather than going back in and trying to work through pieces. I'm going to link a video in our Blackboard page in this module for the unit so that you can watch it. It gives just a short overview of SQ3R. Basically, the S stands for survey. And a lot of us pick our book up, we open to the first page of our chapter, and we read until we are tired, bored, fall asleep, frustrated, whatever it is. If you do the survey first, you will get a good understanding of all of the important points in the whole entire chapter, which is so much more beneficial than opening up to page one and then only reading to page 5. If it's a 40-page chapter, you don't know 35 pages of material. But if you use the survey and spend 5 minutes surveying it, you really have a good understanding of what the chapter is about in its entirety. When I taught in the public schools, I taught Beowulf, and there were a lot of pieces of Beowulf that the students didn't know. But once we did a preview of it, and we looked at, some of the things that the author did for us in the textbook where Beowulf showed up, oh man, it was like an action adventure story. And it gave the students a purpose to read. So when you survey, you read the title. If there's an introduction in the front, a couple paragraphs, you read that. You flip through the chapter, reading the headings and the subheadings, looking at graphics, any bold words or italicized words or words that are in the margin, you read through those. Sometimes they have objectives, whether it's at the beginning of the textbook or interspersed throughout the text or maybe at the end. Oftentimes there's a summary. Oh man, you want to read the summary. It summarizes all the important things. And then there's often study questions or self-test questions. If you take 5 or 10 minutes and look through this in a 30 or 40 page chapter, Like I said, you have a really good understanding of all of the essential important information. So if that's all the time that you have that day, that's okay. You used your time more effectively than if you would have opened up to page 1 and only read to page 5. So the S is survey. From the survey, you will have some questions. Things that you should be like, oh, well, what is the psychoneuroimmunology? Or what are the 4 different personality types? Or how does that particular theory work in real life? These questions are ones that you create. They might be at the beginning of the chapter or interspersed throughout the chapter as objectives. They might be a study guide your instructor gave you. They might be textbook. Manufacturers oftentimes have like an online component. So these questions should be first and foremost in your mind. And there should be quite a few of them that coincide with each of the individual sections of the text. When you create questions, it gives you a purpose to read. And having a purpose, like I have to answer, what are the 3 personality types? Okay. It sustains your attention and it gives you focus. Once you have your questions, you want to vary your plan of attack based on the type of material you're going to read. And you know that type because you've previewed it. So if you're going to read a dense kind of legal or a scientific or a mathematical text, you should probably plan to read it more slowly and more carefully than if it's a novel or a magazine-like text that's on an 8th grade level. So plan your attack based on the complexity of the text. So we have surveying and we have questioning. SQ. The first R is to read, and not just read with your eyes scanning over the page, but to read actively with metacognition. And that means thinking about your thinking. We've all read, and I use that term loosely, for 5 minutes and then realized, I don't remember one thing that I read from this page. Or oftentimes if we drive home the same route every day, we're like, whoa, wait a second, I don't remember. Did I turn at that light? I don't remember stopping at that stop sign. Because our mind is on autopilot. We are not thinking about what's happening in our mind. So you interrogate the text, you ask the question that you've created in the queue, and you read until you get your answer. And then you ask another question, and you read until you get the answer. So if you're confused by a section, go back and reread that section until you can figure out how it answers your question or what the main points are. You should be working with vocabulary as you read as well. We need exposed and use a word 7 times before it becomes part of us. So you don't want to skip those unfamiliar words. You want to use vocabulary strategies to help you figure it out so that you can keep on reading. Okay. Saccadic eye movement is just the process of our eyes moving left to right to decode words. And we want to have a speed. We want to push our eyes to go a little bit faster than slower. So if you want to do a little bit of research on some ways that you can read quicker, look up saccadic eye movement. It's fascinating how it impacts your ability to comprehend. So we have survey, we have question, we have read actively. The second R in SQ3R is to recite it. And that does not mean standing up and saying it out loud, although it could. Reciting means moving that information from your short-term memory, because you've just read it, into your long-term one. And to do this, you want to put what you have learned into your own words. This is where you take your notes. You could write your questions down that you have, or the questions that are at the beginning of the chapter, the questions that your instructor gave you, and then write your answers to those questions. And so that you have a note sheet that's a study tool, and that you know you have essential vocabulary. You know you have all of the key components. because you've done it as you've read. And so you use this note sheet, this question and answer, to help move that information from your short-term to your long-term memory. Okay. And so you can do this as you chunk the material. You can read and recite for a section, and then read and recite for another section, and then read and recite for another section, so that your notes are accurate. So you question, you read actively, and then you recite the material. And then maybe another heading where you turn it into a question. You read to answer it, and then you write down your information. And then you do this as you work your way through the entire chapter or article. The last R is to review. So once you've finished the entire chapter or the entire article and you have your reciting, your notes, then you go back over the questions you created for every heading and you start checking yourself. You cover the answers and ask yourself the question. You fold the page in half so you don't cheat. But you use your notes now as a way to review the material to learn it. So studying is not reading. Reading is reading. The studying comes in the review part of SQ3R. Because if you don't, a man named Ebbinghaus kind of did some research and showed the forgetting curve. And you may know 100% of information when you learn it, but by day 1, 24 hours later, you only know a little bit more than half of it. And when you get a week out, you're like at 10%. So you have to review it consecutively and consistently in order to overcome that curve. Okay? And you can remember a ton of it after 1 month based on how many times you review the information. So you want to use these note sheets to help review and study for a test. Okay? By taking the additional time to study, using the steps in SQ3R, the information you retain is utilized then throughout your study time. And once it's stored in that long-term memory, it becomes easily accessible and easily usable. So all of that information for the classes that you're taking, you have at your fingertips, and you can use it to extend your knowledge. Okay? So you want to practice SQ3R. So whenever you do a textbook chapter or a section of text for your homework in this class and in all of your other classes, take a few minutes and do the S. Look at the questions, create some, see if any are embedded in the textbook already. When you read actively, chunk the material, read to answer the questions, and then recite it by writing them down and then using them as a review. This will benefit you so much if you practice this skill. And the more you practice it, just like any other skill, the easier and quicker you become at it. So I really want you to focus on the next 2 weeks, anytime you have a reading assignment, to do SQ3R. All right? As always, you can email me if you have any questions. Have a great afternoon.